Hey guys, welcome back to Wrestling News 365. Hope everyone is doing very well. As always, there is a ton of news stories to get into today. So let's talk about some WWE news. You can see it on the screen there. The story about NXT and the ratings continues because WWE NXT this past week drew its lowest viewership since the move to Tuesdays earlier this year. Now, Tuesday's live edition of NXT drew 636,000 live viewers on the USA Network. This is according to Nielsen via Brandon Thurston of WrestleNomics. Now, this is down 4.4% from last week's episode, which drew 665,000 live viewers. Tuesday's NXT drew a 0.13 rating in the key 18 to 49 demographic. This is down 23.5%. Man, 23.5% from last week's 0.17 rating in the key demographic. Now, of course, this week featured some key happenings. Obviously, it's the go-home show for the Great American Bash next week. It had a follow-up on Diamond Mine, had a mixed tag team match. Cameron Grimes returned to action, featured a North American Championship main event in which there was a title change. Now, some people will be saying, why did the ratings, why were they so poor? Why was the viewership so poor? Well, this week's episode of NXT did face some strong competition, let's be fair here, from the NBA playoffs. It was the least watched episode since the show moved to Tuesday nights on April 13th, and the lowest viewership since February 3rd, which aired in the Wednesday night time slots up against AEW Dynamite. It was tied with the May 25th show, which also went up against the NBA playoffs for the lowest key demographic rating since the move to Tuesday nights. It was also tied with two other episodes for the lowest key demo rating since the February 10th show. This week's viewership was down 4.4% from last week's post-takeover episode, while the key demographic was down 23.5%. Man, 23.5% from last week. If you're going to look at it year on year, this week's NXT viewership was down 19.7% from the episode that aired one year ago, while the 18 to 49 key demographic was down 41% from the show that aired 1 year ago. That show went up against AEW Dynamite in that Wednesday night time slot too. So realistically, that key demographic, 18 to 49s, the key demographic, the demo, everyone wants to call it. Chris Jericho called himself the Demo God. The key demographic, NXT, is down nearly 50% from last year. Half of the people in that key demographic are no longer watching NXT on a Tuesday night 1 year later. That's significant. And I don't worry, I totally understand. And there are, I don't know if you could use the word excuses. There are reasons behind this. Obviously, the key one is the NBA playoffs. The NBA playoffs, frankly, if you're looking at NXT and AEW and even Monday Night Raw or whatever night an NBA game airs on at the moment, it is killing pro wrestling, absolutely destroying any pro wrestling competition it has. Whether it's on Monday nights, Tuesday nights, Wednesday nights, Thursday nights, whatever night it airs, Friday nights, Saturday nights, no matter what day it airs, the NBA playoffs are just absolutely destroying pro wrestling right now. And I'm sure those within WWE, when they get asked questions about this, because questions will be asked every time there's a low number, whether it's in the rating, whether it's in overall viewership, whether it's in whatever, there's always questions asked. There always will be questions asked about, wait a minute, why is nobody watching the product? WWE will go to their Rolodex of excuses and say, NBA playoffs, that's why. In reality, again, the playoffs are a good rationale for it, but in reality, people aren't watching this show because of the damage that's been done since it moved to Wednesdays. It's now no longer on Wednesdays, obviously it's on Tuesday nights, but still, the faith that certain people had with NXT is no longer there. I speak about this quite a lot when it comes to Monday Night Raw. When people will say, but Raw's been quite good the last couple of weeks, why is nobody watching it? And my response to that is people lost trust. People gave up their trust and people gave up their faith in Raw a long time ago as to, I'll take a risk and I'll tune in tonight and hopefully it'll be good. They know it won't be. Now, it's not the same with NXT. This past week, NXT, once again, was a good show, a good television show. Since Joe was introduced to that brand, it's been a good show. All of the episodes have been relatively good. But there is something missing about NXT, and it's difficult to put your finger on it. We've spoken about it a few times on the channel, and I don't really know if I can really ultimately describe what it is, but that magic, shall we call it, that NXT had prior to moving to USA Network, that kind of underground feel that it had, the kind of best kept secret deal. It's on the network. If you know, you know. You watch the takeovers, they're great. Oh, I wouldn't want to follow that takeover. I wouldn't want to follow that takeover. And the stars getting called up to the main roster. I can't wait to see them on Raw or SmackDown, all that kind of stuff. That kind of magic, that intangible underground quality is gone. And it's kind of a case of with NXT now that maybe for all of these years, we just didn't hold it up to the level of scrutiny that we hold up Raw and SmackDown to. And now that we hold it up to the level of scrutiny that we do hold Raw and SmackDown to in terms of ratings, in terms of quality, in terms of character progression and storyline development and narrative, etc., maybe it just doesn't pass the mark. Maybe it's not that different from Raw and SmackDown, right? I mean, it's a good show, but there's not a lot about NXT, and I think ultimately this is where it comes down to. There's not a lot about NXT where you watch it and you go, man, I can't wait for next week. Or I've got to tune in next week. Whatever plans I had, I've got to tune in for next week because it's going to be great. It was great again. It doesn't have that feel about it, does it? And not a lot of pro wrestling programs do. You know, like when you're watching something on Netflix or Disney Plus or Amazon Prime or Hulu, and you get to the end of the episode, and that's why everything's so binge-worthy nowadays, because you can watch it straight away because you go, oh, I've got to watch it. I've got to watch next week's show. You don't get that. You just don't get that about NXT, and maybe that's the reason why. Now, as I mentioned, yes, we'll talk about the NBA playoffs. Yes, they'll talk about all this other kind of nonsense. But in reality, there are more fundamental issues with NXT. And I think if people thought that they were going to be solved by just having Samoa Joe coming back as an enforcer, again, that's maybe slightly naive. There are just, again, it's really difficult to describe with NXT because objectively, it's not a bad show. You know, like sometimes you'll watch Raw and you go, that was a bad show. That was a real bad show. That was tough to watch. NXT isn't really like that. It's just at the end of it, you go, well, that was cool. That was 2 hours of wrestling. But, you know, am I going to watch it next week? Depends if I've got plans or not. You know, it's nothing that really hooks you in. And I don't know really what the answer is to that one. Is it getting more main roster stars on that show? Maybe. I like the idea of having those main roster stars in that different environment. I think the biggest plus that NXT has is that it's a completely different environment to Raw or SmackDown. It's kind of a cliche, what Finn Balor said when he moved back to NXT, when he said, well, if you're in Raw or SmackDown, that's like being in the Avengers, like being in a Hollywood production. You go to NXT, it's like performing on Broadway. I don't know if I'd call Raw or SmackDown the Avengers. I think that's a massive disservice to the Avengers because, trust me, Raw ain't that good. And neither is SmackDown for that matter. But it is, I get the analogy in terms of it's a different environment. It's a different style. I don't want to say it's a different presentation because ultimately I don't think it is, but it's different. And I like the idea of if a character's stale or there's not a lot for them to do, send them back to NXT for 6 months. Send them back to NXT for a year. Certainly he's done favors for Finn Balor. And if they could get into that system of being able to cycle talent in and out of NXT, of when they need a refresh, go to NXT. It's like going to a different territory and coming back. And then you've come back and you've basically got a different Finn Balor if he goes back to the main roster. Now, that kind of stuff I think works really well. I think that does work really well. I don't know. Like I said, there's issues when it comes to NXT. And I think people within WWE might have thought, well, moving them to Tuesday, AEW was the problem. It was the competition with AEW that was the massive problem. Like we've said before, I think people need to realize that that WWE audience and that AEW audience, they're actually completely separate. There's not a lot of overlap. The Friday night experiment when it comes to the Friday night Dynamites because of the preempted NBA shows has shown there's not a lot of crossover. With those people that watch SmackDown and those people that watch AEW, it's something like 13% is the crossover. It's not a lot. And I think that was the same when you had NXT on a Wednesday and AEW on a Wednesday. There's not a lot of crossover. They weren't really competing for the same audience. They had their own respective audience because that's been proven at this point because that AEW audience has hardly followed NXT to Tuesday. They've hardly gone, well, I don't have to choose now. I'll watch NXT. They've just gone, well, I'm going to watch AEW on a Wednesday and I can't be bothered to watch NXT on a Tuesday. So it's a fascinating story when it comes to NXT and the ratings. And frankly, you know, unless they get some stars in that program, I don't see a reason why it would improve. I don't. Next week's show should do better. It's the Great American Bash. That's a brand that has equity in it. And if that doesn't do better than this week, I think they'd be very disappointed. Very disappointed. But I don't think that's going to be the case. I think it will do better next week. So we'll wait and see with that one. Now, a big story this week has been about WWE Chairman Vince McMahon visiting the Performance Center. It was this big thing that had been hyped up on social media. And WWE Chairman and CEO Vince McMahon was at the Performance Center in Orlando yesterday. As noted, Vince is visiting the Performance Center to scout talent as the company looks to replenish the main roster. Now, PW Insider reported that McMahon was also scheduled to have a meeting with the Performance Center staff and coaches. Now, this is a rare visit from McMahon and has had many of the NXT and Performance Center workers privately concerned, given the amount of cuts the company has made in recent months. Regarding the Performance Center staff, Matt Bloom, of course, is the head coach. A-Train, Albert, Lord Tensai, if you remember those names, and runs things. But Hall of Famer Shawn Michaels has taken on a major role in the last year. Michaels is said to be very progressive towards his approach, leaning into the current evolution of in-ring style that younger wrestlers perform with, while others remain much more conservative in how they approach things. Now, there's some more information on how that trip went. And again, this comes from PW Insider. Now, WWE President and Chief Revenue Officer Nick Khan, Executive Director of Raw and SmackDown Bruce Pritchard, and Senior Vice President of Talent Relations John Laurinaitis were all at the Performance Center yesterday with Vince McMahon, according to PW Insider. Look at those titles. Gosh, they're getting paid by the letter, my word. The group was at the Performance Center to meet with staff and scout talents while they trained. The afternoon was described as, quote, very much a positive day. It was reported earlier that the visit from McMahon had many concerns, as I mentioned. Now, as I mentioned, it's been noted that there were main roster and standard developmental NXT wrestlers at the Performance Center this week to train. It was also reported there was a major scouting effort being done as the company looks to replenish the Raw and SmackDown rosters, and that main roster talents were mandated to be at the Performance Center to train as the company prepares to return to touring with live crowds later on this month. So, I mean, I don't know. There's not really a lot to comment on that. If they think it's gone well, it's gone well. They're there to scout talent. The only positive thing, I suppose, and I'll try and put a positive slant on this, is that I know people at the Performance Center would be concerned, and they're right to be concerned. Let's be honest. Again, they're totally justified. This isn't paranoia of the pro wrestling business. This is, oh my gosh, look how many people have been fired since April, not just on the talent roster, but also look at WWE's headquarters, not just in Stamford, but around the world. There's this big corporate restructuring like Nick Khan's doing, and all of these people are being laid off because of budget cuts, because of this, because of that, restructuring, you name it. So suddenly when you have all of the suits walk into the Performance Center, the big wigs, the high shakers, I don't know if that's a phrase, but, you know, once you've got Vince McMahon, Nick Khan, and Bruce Pritchard, John Laurinaitis, once you've got Vince McMahon and his stooges there, you'd be worried of thinking, oh my gosh, it's like when you work in a big company and, again, the big cheese from overseas comes to visit, everyone panics. I've been and worked in those companies as well, so I'm sure they're all on their best behavior, and Vince McMahon was shaking hands and pure rallying, or maybe fist bumping. You know, we're still in a pandemic, folks. So I don't know really much to say about that. I guess the positive, again, to look at it from this point of view, is actively the higher-ups in WWE, whether it's Vince McMahon, whether it's Nick Khan. I don't really see why Nick Khan needs to be there in terms of a creative. What the hell does he know about creative in pro wrestling? But certainly Bruce Pritchard, John Laurinaitis, if that brain trust is there, the positive you could say is that there is some acknowledgement here that there needs to be some kind of radical overhaul. And I don't mean in terms of corporate structure. I mean in terms of creative. I mean in terms of new talent, new characters. How often are we saying Raw and SmackDown are so stale and boring and it's the same? It's let's run it back. Let's have a rematch. Let's do this. Let's do that. Sometimes they do that because they only have a certain cast of characters to play with and they don't know what to do with them anymore. Maybe it's just an indication of Vince McMahon and everyone else sitting down and going, right, something needs to change. We need to do a complete reset, a complete refresh. Who have you got at the Performance Center? Now, as I mentioned before, my sort of point of that is, surely you would know anyway. Those systems are set up. If Triple H has got a live feed in his office of the Performance Center, so Vince McMahon not knowing people that work there is a bit concerning. Who have we got at the Performance Center that can work? Do you watch NXT? NXT what? NX what? I don't watch that. Nobody does. You know, so I don't know about that. But maybe it's just finally an acknowledgement. You know, something's got to change. Something's got to change. We're going back on the road and we can't put up with this just bad creative and this terrible storylines eventually, because we're not going to sell tickets, because people won't buy a ticket to watch this crap anymore. Maybe that's an acknowledgement. Finally, you know, through the Performance Center and Thunderdome era, the creative has sucked at times and their response has been, it doesn't matter. Nobody's watching inside the arena anyway, not that much at home either, but nobody's watching inside the arena, so it doesn't matter. We can do what we want. That's not the case anymore. They've got to give the crowd what they want. And if the crowd wants new faces and they want new creative and new storylines, they've got to give it to them. Otherwise, they're not selling tickets. Simple as that. So that could be a positive. Or it could just be completely the other side of things. They're going to fire a load of people again. Probably the latter. Probably the latter. Speaking of NXT, Bea Priestley has officially joined NXT. This NXT UK rather, not NXT in the United States, NXT UK. She's officially joined the NXT UK brand. A teaser vignette aired on Thursday on NXT UK and revealed that Blair Davenport was on her way to the brand. The video showed the woman signing her WWE contract. Today's NXT UK show then featured a new vignette that revealed Priestley as Blair Davenport. WWE filed to trademark the Blair Davenport name in early May. Davenport spoke in yesterday's vignette and said she sacrificed everything, is now part of the greatest women's division on earth. She said, quote, "I've wrestled all around the world. I've sacrificed everything to get where I am today. I've given up friends. I've given up family to master what I do. Did you really think I wouldn't end up as part of the greatest women's division on earth?" Blair Davenport has arrived in NXT UK. Now, Bea Priestley has kind of been everywhere over the course of the last couple of years or so. It was reported back in January of 2019 that Priestley had turned down a WWE contract to sign with AEW. She made her debut at Fight for the Fallen in 2019 and then feuded with current AEW Women's World Champion Britt Baker. Priestley ended up released on August 13, 2020, as she was unable to travel to the United States from Japan due to COVID-19 restrictions. Now, Priestley had her Stardom farewell back in April, saying goodbye to the promotion she's worked with since 2017. It was reported then that Priestley did not re-sign with Stardom, and also she did not re-sign with New Japan Pro Wrestling. At the time, there had been some speculation she could be returning to AEW, but of course that never happened. Now, this is interesting, of course, because again, she was working with Stardom, and then she was working with New Japan and the whole Will Ospreay stuff and all that. I don't really know. I know some people have been discussing what's going on in that part of things. I really don't know, so I'm not going to really comment on that. But look, it's a great signing for NXT UK. NXT UK, she's not really wrong. It has a great women's division. Kaylee Ray and, you know, Piper Niven, I guess, isn't on there now. But I think it's a great signing for NXT UK. And not that NXT UK exists, of course, because if Bea Priestley or Blair Davenport, whatever you want to call her, ever makes her way to the main roster, you'll have Monday Night Raw with the commentary team going, "Who is she? I've never seen her before in my life." NXT what? UK, there's a brand out there. There's a Performance Center out there. No. Piper who? Yeah. So, I don't know about that one. Let's go back to talking about WWE and the headquarters, because we mentioned budget cuts when it came to the Performance Center. Well, WWE reportedly made more cuts yesterday. There were a few employees let go yesterday from WWE's headquarters in Stamford, Connecticut. This is according to a report by PW Insider. Now, there's no word yet on how many employees were fired or exactly who has left the company, but it was noted that there were some from the marketing department. Again, this is all part of WWE President and Chief Revenue Officer Nick Khan, his desire to lead a corporate restructure over the course of the last few months, and this is just a continuation of that. It was recently reported that more behind-the-scenes changes and departures are expected. We saw some releases last week. That's not going to be the end of it, unfortunately. Nick Khan is rebuilding the WWE in his image. Reportedly, and again, this is a bit of an unconfirmed story, but this is what I've heard, and it does make a lot of sense to me. So essentially, during the pandemic last year, obviously the stock price went down and there was a lot of concern from WWE about how much this was going to hurt their bottom line. Nick Khan essentially said to Vince McMahon, make all of these cuts, have all this corporate restructuring, then you can say that your profits are higher than ever and your revenue's higher than ever because, again, they signed these new revenue deals, but their profits are higher than ever because their overheads are far less because they released all of these talents and employees, producers, etc. And the stock will go up. The stock will rebound because we're making these great profits even in a pandemic. So look how much the stock price will go up when we report this, because people will look at it and go, wow, that's a profitable company. Whoa, look how much money they're making during a pandemic. Just imagine what it's going to be like when they're out of the pandemic. And it worked. The stock price went back up a bit. And Nick Khan said, see? And Vince McMahon went, I like that guy, made him the chief revenue officer or chief financial officer, whatever, and made him the president of the company. And now Nick Khan, as Vince McMahon is going to him, go, what other ideas have you got? And Nick Khan saying, we need to just completely restructure all of this. We don't need all of these people at the Performance Center. We don't need all of these people under contract. We don't need all of these people around these offices around the world. And frankly, is he wrong? I don't know. I don't know if he's technically wrong about that. I guess this is kind of the sins of the past, catching up to WWE. Of WWE for years at this point, has had a policy. Forget the corporate side of things, but in terms of the talent side of things, they've had a policy of stockpiling talent. We're just going to sign all these people. We don't know what we're going to do with you, but we'll give you a contract and we might find it out later on. If not, we'll let you go. And Nick Khan's come in and said, why are there all these people under contract just from a financial point of view when we're not using them? It doesn't make any sense. And again, he's not totally wrong in that sense. He's not totally wrong. If you look at it from an objective business point of view, if he's looking at numbers on a paper, he must go, well, it doesn't make any sense. So again, it's hurtful to see anyone lose their job, whether they're talent or corporate or whatever. But you can see it from his perspective. I will concede that. You can see it from their perspective of, why are we doing this? As a new sider coming in, and maybe Vince McMahon's fine. Listen, once you talk to Vince McMahon in terms of dollars and cents, he will listen. This is evidence of all of that. So these cuts, unfortunately, are going to continue. This is a really interesting story. Talking about Triple H wanting to help Jon Moxley when he had his MRSA infection a couple of years ago. Now, on this week's episode of Oral Sessions, Renee Paquette spoke with former Women's Tag Team Champions, the Iconics, about their releases back in April. One note Paquette made on her show had to do with the friendships that grow and possibly deepen even after departures with the company. Despite the competition that has increasingly grown among other promotions facing WWE, it seems there always is a camaraderie amongst these talents across the board. To illustrate, Renee Paquette talked about how Executive Vice President of Global Talent Strategy Development and COO for WWE Triple H went out of his way to check in on Jon Moxley after suffering a severe MRSA infection in his elbow back in August of 2019. In her statement, she described how Triple H provided any help he could on behalf of Moxley's well-being, as well as offering WWE support, although Moxley had departed the company and at this point was already signed with AEW, and it was publicly known he was going to compete All Out. She said, quote, even when Jon left, there were times that Hunter pulled me aside because Jon was injured. When he came back from New Japan, Hunter kept checking in to make sure that Jon was okay. If he needed anything, they would have been able to help him in any kind of capacity. So it was nice to know that the olive branch was still extended and it wasn't that heat-seeking thing that everybody thinks it is. We've all spent so much time together, nothing bad went down. And that's a great story to hear because you don't hear that often. And I know a lot of people look at social media, and it's funny because a story like that won't get publicized in the same vein as WWE on their Twitter account congratulating just Renee Young for giving birth. They'll be like, they hate Jon Moxley, they hate Dean Ambrose, da-da-da. And then the other story of Triple H going to Renee Young behind the scenes and saying, look, I just heard about Jon Moxley, I know he's got a MRSA infection, that's serious. Look, if I can do anything, if he needs anything from WWE, if he needs any help for treatment or whatever, just let us know. We can sort it out. We can fix it. And again, he's an AEW contracted talent at that point because he was going to compete All Out against Pac. That was widely against Kenny Omega rather. That was widely known. So credit WWE, credit Triple H again. Not that would be highly publicized. It won't be, but I think it's just that's worth pointing out. I really do. Finally, WWE has officially announced that they are returning to Madison Square Garden. The announcement was made yesterday that WWE is returning to MSG for Friday Night SmackDown on September 10. They briefly released a statement saying WWE will make its highly anticipated return to New York City as Friday Night SmackDown takes place at Madison Square Garden on September 10th. The weekly spectacular broadcast live every Friday night on Fox at 8/7 Central features Universal Champion Roman Reigns, SmackDown Women's Champion Bianca Belair, SmackDown Tag Team Champions Rey and Dominic Mysterio, the Intercontinental Champion Apollo Crews, Edge, Sasha Banks, Bayley, Seth Rollins, Big E, Kevin Owens, and more. Tickets will be available for the event starting next Friday, July 9 at 10 a.m. Eastern Time via Ticketmaster. So this has been widely reported, so it's been officially confirmed. Now they're heading back to the Garden. People will say, it's about AEW because AEW is going to New York in September, all that kind of stuff. From what we've heard, that isn't kind of really the case. WWE has had a lot of events, a lot of dates rather they've wanted to do at MSG this year, and it's just been a case of figuring out how. A lot of those dates did center around September, but it doesn't have a lot to do with AEW, unfortunately. I know that's not a juicy story, but it just doesn't. So that's kind of the situation there. But look, great to see WWE back in MSG. It's their home. It's their mecca. It's where WWE was truly born, wasn't it? So it's going to be a big event, and it's just another big event with WWE's return to touring that I'm very excited to see. But look, guys, as always, this is just one man's opinion. What are your thoughts on all these WWE news stories we've spoken about today? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I'll do my best to respond and reply to all of your comments. Really enjoy interacting with you guys, talking about WWE, AEW, Impact Wrestling, New Japan Pro Wrestling, all things pro wrestling here on the channel. So be sure to get involved with the community, drop a comment below. All opinions are welcome. If you have enjoyed this video, please do smash a like on the like button too. Really does help us out here on YouTube. Got the rankings and get into people's recommendation feeds if they haven't seen our videos previously. But most importantly, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to Wrestle News 365. You can do that by clicking the bottom right hand corner of the screen right now, or if you wait a few seconds, there'll be a subscribe button at the end of this video along with another video for you to watch. Thank you very much for watching, listening, streaming, or have you come across this video today, and I'll speak to you again very, very soon.
Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.